They shaped generations. They appeared on posters, moved entire families to tears, and helped turn the Ten Commandments, 1956, into one of the greatest biblical epics in movie history. But nearly 70 years have passed, and so much has changed. Today we're going to reveal the fate of the actors who brought Moses, Ramses, Nefertari, Zipporah, Joshua, and so many other unforgettable faces to life. Some became Hollywood legends. Others lived through deeply unexpected personal journeys marked by faith, tragedy, fresh starts, and spiritual discoveries that very few people know about. Many have already passed away, leaving behind extraordinary legacies. A rare few are still alive, carrying precious memories from behind the scenes of this monumental epic. You're about to discover remarkable stories, from actors whose careers were rescued because of this film to profound personal transformations that began during production itself. And at the end, there is a special revelation about the last great surviving star of this historic cast. Are you ready to revisit the names that became part of your childhood, your faith, and the history of cinema? Let's begin. Charlton Heston. Moses. Charlton Heston never treated Moses like just another role. He believed that portraying biblical figures demanded reverence, spiritual preparation, and a deep sense of responsibility. Although he was an Anglican Episcopalian, he had a profound admiration for the history of Christianity, and during filming, he found himself drawn even closer to faith. Years later, he shared that when he reflected on the scene of the burning bush, he did not imagine the voice of God as something external or terrifying, but as something that touches the soul from within. So when Cecil B DeMille asked him how he imagined the divine voice, Heston answered that he believed it should be my own voice speaking inside Moses, like a deep calling rising from the heart itself. The director loved the idea so much that he had Heston record the voice used in the scene, later altering it technically. Another powerful detail with spiritual weight is that Heston's own son, Fraser Heston, played the infant Moses in the opening scenes. There was something deeply symbolic in that. The actor was holding his own son in his arms while portraying the future deliverer of Israel. Many Christian viewers see that as one reason Heston radiates such tenderness and strength in those moments. He once said that filming the Sinai scenes made him feel a burden that was not merely artistic, as though he were dealing with something far greater than cinema. Throughout his life, Heston reread the book of Exodus many times, and he said that playing Moses made him more aware of the moral responsibility every person carries. Charlton Heston died on April 5, 2008, at the age of 84, at his home in Beverly Hills after complications associated with Alzheimer's disease. Yul Brynner. Ramses II. Yul Brynner was forever marked by his role as Pharaoh Ramses II in the Ten Commandments. A Russian-American with roots in the Eastern Christian tradition, he attended an Orthodox church in New York and chose to be buried in an Orthodox monastery in France, showing that questions of faith and eternity were never far from his life. From the beginning, he understood that he would be playing the man who hardens his heart before God. Cecil B DeMille often said that the film's great theme was precisely this: whether man should be governed by the law of God or by the whims of a dictator like Ramses. Brynner embraced that tension completely. His Ramses is proud, dazzling on the outside, yet empty before the true God. One intense experience during filming came when he learned that he would spend almost the entire movie shirtless while acting opposite Charlton Heston, who already had an imposing physical presence. He refused to look smaller than Moses' rival, so he threw himself into a demanding bodybuilding program, sculpting an even more powerful physique. The result was that unforgettable Ramses: rigid posture, broad chest, falcon-shaped armor, and a gaze that seems to challenge heaven itself, almost like a living idol. For anyone watching with eyes of faith, it is impossible not to remember that all of that arrogance is ultimately shattered by the hand of God in the Exodus story. Off-screen, Brynner was a heavy smoker for many years, reportedly going through as many as 4 or 5 packs a day. He eventually developed lung cancer. Already gravely ill, he recorded the famous message:
"Now that I'm gone, I tell you, don't smoke. Whatever you do, just don't smoke." If I could take back that smoking, we wouldn't be talking about any cancer. I'm convinced of that.
Yul Brynner died on October 10, 1985, at the age of 65 in a New York hospital, a victim of lung cancer. His ashes were taken to the Saint-Michel-de-Bois-Aubry Monastery in France. Anne Baxter, Nefertari. Anne Baxter was immortalized as Nefertari, the Egyptian princess who fights for Moses' heart in the Ten Commandments. She was already a respected actress and an Oscar winner when Cecil B DeMille chose her after watching Carnival Story several times. Years later, she summed up the impact of working on this epic by saying, "There was only one DeMille, and there wasn't an actor in the world who didn't want to work with him at least once." She knew she was stepping into a project deliberately built around the Holy Scriptures, conceived by the director himself as a way of bringing people closer to the Bible. One memorable experience tied to the role was the physical transformation DeMille demanded. With humor, she later said that Alfred Hitchcock had made her blonde in I Confess, and at that point, Cecil B DeMille made me a redhead. He used henna to turn her hair copper-colored, explaining that this shade was common in ancient Egypt and would help reinforce the image of a sensual, powerful queen. In the film, Nefertari is the woman divided between the splendor of Egypt's gods and the living God who walks with Moses. For many Christians, she becomes a symbol of the heart that falls in love with the servant of God but does not want to let go of the throne or of sin. It is no surprise that Baxter said she still loved watching the film every year at Easter, with bread, wine, and chocolate, as if she were sitting before a sacred drama staged on the grandest scale possible. In her personal life, Anne had 3 daughters. One of them eventually became a cloistered nun, spending years in a Catholic monastery in Rome, a sign that faith and questions about God were never far from her family. On December 4th, 1985, Anne Baxter suffered a stroke while trying to hail a taxi on Madison Avenue in New York. She was taken to Lenox Hill Hospital and remained on life support for 8 days without regaining consciousness. She died on December 12, 1985, at the age of 62. Yvonne de Carlo, Zipporah. Yvonne de Carlo brought Zipporah, the wife of Moses, to life and became, in many ways, the feminine soul of the Ten Commandments. Born Margaret Yvonne Middleton on September 1st, 1922, in Vancouver. She was raised in the Anglican faith, sang in the choir at St. Paul's Church, and said that one of her most treasured possessions as a young woman was a small white leather Bible she received at her confirmation. Years later, when she visited Israel, she said she went to Cana, the site of Jesus' first miracle, and thought that someone ought to film the true story of the Bible there. That alone shows how deeply these sacred themes touched her heart. One unforgettable experience connected to the Ten Commandments involved the very feature audiences remembered most: her eyes. When Cecil B DeMille interviewed her, he praised Yvonne's wonderful gray eyes, but said she would need to wear brown contact lenses to appear more like a Midianite woman. She agreed and had custom lenses made by an eye specialist. But on set, the lenses kept slipping out of place. After many failed attempts, DeMille changed his mind. He decided those eyes were a treasure given by God, and he would not be the one to alter them. There is something beautiful in that, spiritually speaking. The actress who played the faithful wife of Moses in a film about the law of God was, in the end, the one whose God-given features were allowed to remain untouched. A moment when the director recognized something as a gift from God, something that should never be erased. As she grew older, Yvonne drew even closer to faith. She attended Bible studies with a Christian friend who would tell her, "You need Jesus. You need to receive him and lean on him." Yvonne herself later wrote that God had delivered her from difficult moments in life, and she used a striking image. She said that long ago, she had chosen God and she would remain with him because God's calling never ends. In 1998, she suffered a minor stroke and spent her final years at the Motion Picture and Television Retirement Home in Woodland Hills. Yvonne de Carlo died on January 8, 2007, at the age of 84, from heart failure. She was cremated, leaving behind the memory of an actress who took both her art and her faith seriously. Sir Cedric Hardwicke. Seti. Sir Cedric Hardwicke, the face of Pharaoh Seti in the Ten Commandments, already carried a long history of playing powerful authority figures by the time he entered Cecil B DeMille's epic. An English actor born on February 19, 1893, he came out of the classical world of Shakespeare and George Bernard Shaw. He was already used to portraying kings, heads of state, and religious figures in films like The Keys of the Kingdom and The Hunchback of Notre Dame. But in DeMille, he may have found the most human pharaoh of his career. Seti is the ruler who adopts Moses, loves him like a son, and then, in the end, signs the decree that wipes him out of Egypt's history. That famous line, "Let the name of Moses be stricken from every book and tablet, erased from the memory of men forever," depends heavily on Hardwicke's firm, commanding voice to carry the crushing weight of human judgment standing against the plan of God. One remarkable moment connected to this role came after the film's release. The Ten Commandments received the Stephen S. Wise Medal from the American Jewish Congress as the most inspiring film of the year. And it was not only DeMille who was honored. Charlton Heston, Yul Brynner, Edward G. Robinson, Sir Cedric Hardwicke, Nina Foch, and Martha Scott were also recognized for their performances. For a British actor playing Pharaoh Seti, the just ruler, to take part in a film about the Exodus, a story so central to both Jewish and Christian faith, and then be honored by a Jewish institution for helping bring that story to life, says so much about the spiritual reach of this project. Hardwicke's calm, weary presence highlights that powerful biblical contrast. The limited justice of earthly kings against the perfect justice of God, and the law that would later be given at Sinai. Away from the screen, Hardwicke enjoyed a career that lasted more than 50 years. He wrote memoirs and lived long enough to see his son, Edward, also become a respected actor. But after a lifetime of heavy smoking, he eventually developed chronic lung disease. He died on August 6, 1964 at the age of 71 in New York. His body was returned to England, cremated at Golders Green, and his ashes were scattered there. Edward G. Robinson, Dathan. Edward G. Robinson, born Emanuel Goldenberg into a Jewish family in Bucharest, came to the United States as a boy after his brother was attacked in an anti-Semitic assault. He later said that at Ellis Island, he felt as if he had been born again. And throughout his life, he never lost his deep pride in his Jewish identity. He remained connected to his community and committed to the causes of his people. Over the course of his career, he became a strong voice against Nazism, donating money to war relief efforts and using his fame to speak out against fascism. But in the 1950s, he experienced a very different kind of humiliation. He was investigated by the House Un-American Activities Committee. Even though he was not a communist, he found himself graylisted in Hollywood, watching his work fade and his reputation become stained. And that is exactly where the Ten Commandments entered his story. In 1954, Cecil B. DeMille chose him to play Dathan, the Hebrew traitor who sells himself to Egypt and later leads the people into the idolatry of the golden calf. DeMille knew the actor's political situation. He looked into the case and concluded that Robinson had been treated unfairly, so he gave him the role anyway, defying those who argued that Robinson should not be hired. Robinson himself would later say, "Cecil B. DeMille gave me back my place in films. Cecil B. DeMille restored my self-respect." At the beginning of filming, DeMille was uncertain about Robinson's acting style. But after seeing the first dailies, he realized that Robinson's ironic, poisonous edge gave Dathan a sarcastic energy that made the character even more dangerous and even more seductive. And for anyone watching through the lens of faith, there is something deeply striking here. The actor who played the apostate Dathan was himself a Jewish man who knew from the inside the weight of persecution and public shame. In real life, he had endured something like a national judgment. And it was through a film about the law of God that he found a kind of restoration in the eyes of the public. Edward G. Robinson died on January 26, 1973, at the age of 79, from bladder cancer at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles. His funeral was held at Temple Israel, where Charlton Heston delivered the eulogy. He was laid to rest in the family mausoleum at Bethel Cemetery in Queens, New York. John Derek, Joshua. John Derek, who plays Joshua in the Ten Commandments, is that young, determined face that appears beside Moses in the film's second act, leading the people with a sword in his hand and unwavering purpose in his eyes. Born Derek Delavan Harris on August 12, 1926, in Hollywood, he came from a family already connected to the film industry. His father was a director, and his mother was an actress. Even at a young age, he caught the attention of major figures, including Humphrey Bogart. He was groomed as a leading man, eventually signing with Paramount, and later being cast by Cecil B. DeMille to play none other than the successor to Moses. One notable detail from the production is that Derek took the role of Joshua very seriously as a soldier of God. Behind-the-scenes accounts say that he worked out every day in the studio gym, trying to build a more athletic physique for the role. And that makes perfect sense when you look at the finished film. Joshua is not just a handsome extra in the background. He truly looks like someone prepared to defend the people, a man you could trust with your life in the middle of battle. For those who know the Bible, Joshua is the leader who inherits Moses' mission and enters the promised land with courage and faith. And in the film, even without delivering long theological speeches, John Derek helps communicate exactly that image of loyalty and strength. He becomes a kind of right hand, staying beside God's chosen servant while others, like Dathan, turn toward idolatry. What is especially interesting is that off-camera, Derek was a man full of personal contradictions, with multiple marriages and complicated choices. And that reflects an important spiritual truth. Sometimes God uses deeply imperfect people to help tell perfect stories. Stories about obedience, covenant, and promise. John Derek eventually stepped away from acting and became a director and photographer. He also became widely known for helping launch the career of his wife, Bo Derek. He died on May 22, 1998, at the age of 71 in Santa Maria, California from cardiovascular disease. His remains were cremated. Nina Foch, Bithiah. Nina Foch is the serene and noble face of Bithiah, the Pharaoh's daughter who rescues the baby Moses from the Nile and raises him as her own son. Born on April 20, 1924 in the Netherlands and raised in the United States, she grew up surrounded by music, discipline, and theater. She studied with renowned teachers such as Lee Strasberg and Stella Adler, which helps explain the quiet strength she brings to the role. Bithiah is not merely an Egyptian princess. She is a woman who chooses life at a moment when Egypt chooses death. And that act reflects spiritual values of mercy, protection, and divine purpose. During the filming of the Ten Commandments, Nina agreed to wear darker contact lenses to match the look DeMille wanted for Pharaoh's daughter. It was uncomfortable, especially under the intense heat of the studio lights, but she accepted it as part of the sacrifice required to honor the story. In the film, her character makes a decision that changes everything. She leaves the royal court and walks with the Hebrews, like someone turning away from the idols of Egypt to join the people who follow the one true God. That spiritual reading of the character has always been deeply loved by Christians who cherish the film. Over the course of her life, Nina became one of Hollywood's most beloved teachers, instructing students in directing and acting at USC and the AFI for more than 4 decades. She once said, "Teaching is the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my life." In the end, her greatest legacy may have been shaping new generations. Nina Foch died on December 5, 2008, at the age of 84, from complications related to myelodysplastic syndrome, a disease in which the bone marrow begins producing blood cells poorly, causing anemia and physical weakness. She was cremated, leaving behind both her work and her influence as a living part of cinema history. John Carradine, Aaron. John Carradine, who portrayed Aaron in the Ten Commandments, had every reason to understand the spiritual weight of that role. He was born on February 5, 1906, in New York, under the name Richmond Reed Carradine. He was the grandson of Beverly Carradine, a well-known Methodist evangelist associated with the holiness movement. After his father died while he was still young, John studied in Episcopal schools, where he was required to memorize long passages from the Book of Common Prayer as punishment. He later remembered that experience by saying that even though it was harsh, it sharpened his memory and trained him to speak sacred texts out loud. It is striking to think that the actor who would later play Israel's first high priest grew up surrounded by liturgy, hymns, and biblical language. Even the path that led him to DeMille feels almost providential. Before becoming a recognized actor, Carradine worked as a set designer in the studio. Then one day, the director saw him walking down a hallway, reciting the gravedigger's speech from Hamlet entirely from memory. DeMille was so impressed by that deep, commanding voice that he called him in the very next day and brought him into his regular company of actors. Decades later, that partnership would reach one of its high points when Carradine was chosen to play Aaron, the brother of Moses. Film critics often say this was Carradine's finest serious role since The Grapes of Wrath, because of the sensitivity with which he portrays a man torn between faith and the pressure of the people. In many scenes, Aaron appears as the voice of Moses, the man who speaks to the people on God's behalf, yet who is also fragile. And in Scripture, he eventually gives in during the episode of the Golden Calf. For Christian viewers, there is something powerful in that. An actor with evangelical roots ended up portraying the very priest who must learn, the hard way, the difference between true leadership and pleasing the crowd. In his personal life, Carradine built a massive career. With more than 300 film and television credits, 4 marriages, and an entire dynasty of actor sons and grandsons, including David, Keith, and Robert Carradine. In his later years, he suffered from painful rheumatoid arthritis, along with heart and kidney problems. He died on November 27, 1988, at the age of 82, in Milan, Italy, from heart and kidney failure. According to his family, shortly before being hospitalized, he had still managed to climb the 328 steps of the Duomo. A funeral mass was held at St. Thomas the Apostle Episcopal Church in Hollywood, and his body was ultimately buried at sea between the California coast and Catalina Island. Debra Paget, Lilia Debra Paget, remained in the memory of many viewers as Lilia, the humble and faithful Hebrew servant in the Ten Commandments. Born on August 19, 1933 in Denver, she was already under contract with 20th Century Fox when she was loaned out to Paramount to play this role, which would become the most memorable performance of her career. One of the hardest parts of filming was purely physical, but it affected her deeply. Because she had blue eyes, she had to wear brown contact lenses, so she would appear more Middle Eastern and less visibly Western. She later admitted, "Without the lenses, I wouldn't have gotten the part." At the same time, she also remembered how awful those lenses were to wear, especially because the hot studio lights made everything worse. It became a daily sacrifice of comfort in order to bring authenticity to a young slave girl who suffers injustice, yet remains connected to the God of Israel. What is especially moving is that years later, her own life took a path deeply aligned with stories of faith. After leaving film and television in the mid-1960s, and after marrying oil executive Louis Kung, with whom she had one son, Debra went through a deeper spiritual journey. She became a born-again Christian and began appearing frequently on Christian television. She even hosted a program called An Interlude with Debra Paget on Trinity Broadcasting Network, where she spoke simply and openly about Jesus, prayer, and life with God. There is something deeply touching about that. The actress who played Lilia, a symbol of purity in the middle of oppression, ended up personally embracing faith in Christ and using her voice for that very purpose. Debra Paget has long been retired from acting and lives a private life. As of 2025, she is still alive, one of the last great surviving members of the principal cast of the Ten Commandments. Cecil B DeMille, director and producer. Cecil B DeMille was not simply a great Hollywood director. He saw the Ten Commandments as a mission directly tied to faith. In the film's own prologue, he looks into the camera and sums up the heart of the project by saying that its theme is whether men should be governed by the law of God or by the whims of a dictator like Rameses. For him, this was never just spectacle. It was about true freedom in the light of God's word. Publicly associated with the Episcopal tradition, DeMille often said that God's law is the foundation of real liberty. Years later, in a famous speech about the commandments, he expressed his spiritual vision this way: "We cannot break the Ten Commandments. We can only break ourselves against them, or, by keeping them, rise through them into the fullness of freedom under God." One unforgettable event during filming shows just how far he carried. In 1954, at the age of 73, he climbed a structure more than 100 feet high on the massive Egyptian set to get a close look at the special effects for the parting of the Red Sea. While he was up there, he suffered a serious heart attack. Egyptian doctors urged him to rest for several weeks, but DeMille refused to stop. He worked out a plan with his doctor that allowed him to direct while seated, conserving his strength as the crew adjusted everything around him. The film we see today, with its enormous crowds and monumental scenes, was completed by a man who quite literally risked his heart to tell the story of the Exodus. Earlier, when he traveled to Sinai to choose filming locations, he received a blessing from the monks of St. Catherine's Monastery at the foot of the mountain traditionally associated with Moses. A simple gesture, yet one filled with meaning for a man preparing to recreate on a grand scale one of the most powerful encounters between God and humanity. After the Ten Commandments, DeMille's health was never the same. He suffered a series of additional heart attacks between 1958 and early 1959, and he died on January 21, 1959, at the age of 77 in Los Angeles from heart failure. His funeral was held at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church, and he was buried at Hollywood Forever Cemetery, bringing to a close the life of the man many came to call the one who brought the law of God to the silver screen. It is remarkable to see how the 10 Commandments has endured across generations, and how the life of each actor became part of this larger story. Most of them are now gone, but their work still lives on, continuing to inspire, move hearts, and remind us that truly great works never die. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and pass it along so this message can reach even more people. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next videos. The peace of Christ be with you.